I mentioned in the last session of a case study by the Clapham Sect, and that's what we want to look at in this session. The Clapham Sect was a group of Christians that lived in Clapham, England. They were called derogatorily the Saints by most Englishmen and many other Christians. But they had a commitment and a vision to see England transformed. At the time, England was, people were drunk, they were on drugs. England was not what we think of England today. She was impoverished and not a very good place to be. And they had a vision for seeing the slavery in British Empire end, educational and prison reforms, and a missions movement established. And these leaders were all living in the same suburb of London, England, called Clapham. And over a period of 45 years, they worked together tirelessly and were used by God to transform England in that time. So that's what we want to look at, is this group. It was started in 1790 by Henry Venn, who was a member of the Holy Trinity Church in Clapham. It was active from 1790 to 1830. There were 17 core member, and we should say it, 17 core member families. There were 17 people that committed together to work together for the sake of England, living in the same community, in their case, going to the same church, and they met in the home of a banker named Henry Thornton. So in this group, there were politicians, there were pastors, there were governors and administrators, economists and bankers, scholars, writers and poets, and philanthropists. So there's leading members of society who were Christians, who had a vision to see England reformed. They had a comprehensive agenda. They focused on the abolition of slavery and the slave trade. And just think of that one thing, slavery, how embedded that is. They reform of the penal system. They wanted to see the transforming of morals of the society, banning bullfighting, bear baiting, getting rid of the lottery, things that were not conducive to a healthy society. They fought for better working conditions in factories and fought to eliminate child labor. They helped establish Christian schools. They helped with the reform of the British East India Company, and they founded several mission sending organizations, including the Church Mission Society, which was the sending agency for William Carey. And many of you may have heard of William Carey and his work in India. So we know them mostly for bringing an end to slavery, but that was not the only thing. They had a comprehensive vision. They realized that all of these issues that were impoverishing England were all related. And you needed to deal with them in a comprehensive way. Some of their tactics, they worked to shape public opinion. They issued journals. They wrote letters, tracts, and pamphlets. They spearheaded petition drives. They spoke and taught in public. They worked in concert with the Anglican Church. They worked through the social sectors of governance, law, arts, communication, education. They wanted to impact these sectors so that through the sectors they're impacting the larger society. And they gave sacrificially of their time and wealth, and they were committed with their pocketbooks. They were willing to pay a price. And we mentioned this in the last session. Are you willing to pay a price? Are you willing to give the best you have for seeing your city or your nation reformed? They were ridiculed as the saints. They were a moral group, a virtuous group. Macaulay gave up night after night sleep, neglected his business, and lost much of his substantial fortune in contributing to the work of the Clapham Sect. Thornton gave up 80% of his income to charity. This is the kind of level, sacrificing sleep, sacrificing business, giving money at an exorbitant rate. Ramsay, one of them, was hounded by malicious accusations. Wilberforce, who's the name that we mostly know, suffered nervous breakdowns, and his life was often threatened for the boldness of his work. Macaulay took passage on an African slave ship so that he might witness firsthand the horrors of the slave trade. These men and their families were willing to pay a price to see England reformed. They had victories. They eventually had the emancipation of slavery and the slave trade. Realize this now. Before they could end the slave trade, they had to make the concept of slavery unthinkable. They had to change the culture. Slavery was embedded in the legal system. It was embedded in the business and economics. Slaves were free labor. And they had to first teach England, educate England to see that slavery was a moral evil. Think of that task. How do you change the whole culture of a nation to see something that the nation says is normal becoming an evil? And only after they changed the culture were they able to change the laws to emancipate the slaves. They brought prison reform, factory reform in terms of child labor, women working in the factories. They founded mission sending organizations. They reformed the British East India Company, which was the company that ran India for the British. And they founded Sierra Leone to provide a home for refugee slaves. And Macaulay, one of the members of the Clapham Sect, was the first governor of Sierra Leone to create a place where African slaves could return as free men to the continent. Here's some of the characteristics of how they functioned. They set clear and specific goals. They weren't just dreamers. They said, if this is going to happen, these are the things that we need to do. They researched carefully to produce reliable and irrefutable evidence. They weren't just blowing hot air or sloganeering. They did the hard work of research so that the things that they were saying were well-founded. They built a committed support community, and they refused to accept setbacks as final defeats. In other words, things did not go well over these 40 years. They'd run into brick walls, but they continued to push on. They committed to the struggle for the long haul, even if it took decades. And it did. They committed over 40 years of their lives to work together to see these changes in England. It wasn't, oh, well, we'll pray for these changes and see what happens. It wasn't, well, we'll give ourselves 6 months and see what we can do. No, they committed the bulk of their lives over 40 years to see these changes. They focused on issues, not allowing opponents' vicious attacks to distract or provoke them. They empathized with opponents. They put themselves in the shoes of their opponents, in other words, so they could see how their opponents saw things. And they could have a place of meaningful dialogue and interaction with the people that were opposing them. They accepted incremental gains. I remember reading the story of slavery. They got to the point where after 20 years, the most they could do was make slavery illegal. And then it took another 20 years to emancipate the slaves. That's the kind of increments. They realized they couldn't get the whole thing at one time. So they created incremental plans. They cultivated grassroots support as well as grass tops influence. These were all grass tops people, but they not only worked with the established Church of England to bring these changes, but they created grassroots networks that they influenced. They transcended a single issue mentality by addressing issues as part of an overall moral climate. And this is one of the things today we so often, our educational system does this to us. You have math here, you have history here, you have arts here, and these are in silos. They're not integrated. So we tend to think in terms of silos, and we have a siloed, oh, here's a problem here. Here's a problem here. Well, I'm going to work on this problem. you can work on that problem. Not realizing that these problems often exist because they have the same foundation, moral and ideas foundation. And so they're all there. And if you want to deal with them, you have to deal at the foundational level of the moral and the ideological. Most people want to simply focus on changing programs or changing policies without doing the harder work of dealing with principles and paradigms. These guys dealt with principles and paradigms and changed the moral culture of England. They proceeded with the sense of a mission and conviction that God would providentially guide if they were faithfully acting in his service. They believed that God would lead them. Too often we get into these big things we're dealing with. What do? I don't know what to do. They understood that God would lead them if they were faithful to the vision that God had put on them, that he would interdict and do things to support them and help this move forward. Now, if you're thinking in these terms for your own city or for your country, what's the application? How do we begin? First, where are we at as a group? What do we have? What sectors and spheres are represented by our members? What are group members already doing to influence and reform the spheres? What local churches are represented by existing group members? What is happening in those churches that connect to our vision? What cultural and political capital exists within our group? What networks are represented by our group? It's doing an inventory of what you have, both individually and corporately, within your group, within your church, within your connections as a church. What are the resources? What is the economic capital that we have? What exists within the group? The Clapham Sect had two bankers and financiers that were very wealthy men. And they were part of the group not only to provide the leadership, but to help support the activities. Who are the ideas experts? Who are the people that are the ones wrestling with what do we need to do to change this, and who are out speaking about it? Then who are the modelers? I remember one of the people involved in the Clapham Sect was, he created, I think it was Wedgeworth was his name, but he did China, fine English China. Well, what do you do when you're making expensive china for wealthy people? What can I do to contribute to this? And he made a medallion that had a picture of a slave in chains, kneeling and praying. And the caption said, "I too am a man." So he created something as a person who dealt with fine china that everybody wanted to wear. So all the wealthy people who were buying his china were buying these ceramic things for their lapels that said, "I too am a man." So it's things like that. What are the people, what are your skills? And how can you model what you're doing with your skills? Who are the connectors? Who are the balladeers? Who are the artists and musicians who are willing to stand against the trends of society and create music that challenges, in this case, slavery? You just think of all the stuff that people listen to today and watch today. Where are the Christians that are there? And are the Christian artists simply mimicking what the world is doing with their art? Or are they using their art to focus on the moral evils in the country and to write music, to write plays that will be used in the public square to challenge the evils that are going on in the society? What are we lacking, and what steps can we take to fill the gap? So we have all these resources we're going to mobilize. Where are the gaps? What are things we need that we don't have, and where do we get those? Who do we need to invite to join us? What role do we see them filling? Next steps: cultivate relationships. Pray, fast, listen to God, and share what you hear. Articulate a common vision that relates to the kingdom, thy kingdom come to your city. Develop common operating principles. And here's the acronym CARE. Clarify objectives, agree on expectations, resource the initiative, evaluate the process and outcomes. Determine the platform for operating. Determine the leadership. And last, do a reality check. Are you willing to pay the price? We've gone over this in the last two sessions that provide a framework for seeing your city or your nation reformed. Now, are you willing to do it? Are you willing to band together with other like-minded Christians and commit your life, not just your thoughts or your wishes, but commit your life to seeing your nation, your city transformed?